The desert wind swept across Fort Apache like a warning, carrying dust and the promise of another scorching day. Colonel William Hartford stood on the wooden porch of his quarters, watching the morning drill with cold blue eyes that had seen too many battles. His uniform was pressed perfect, every button gleaming, every crease sharp as a knife blade. This was his domain, his little piece of order carved out of what he called savage territory. Inside the house, his daughter Elena moved quietly through the rooms, arranging flowers she'd picked from the small garden behind the kitchen. At 19, she had her mother's gentle face but her father's stubborn jaw. Her dark hair was pinned up proper, the way army wives taught their daughters, and her blue dress was simple but clean. She'd learned early that noise bothered her father, especially in the mornings when he planned his campaigns. Elena had grown up listening to war stories at dinner tables, watching maps spread across their kitchen table like tablecloths stained with red marks. Each red mark meant another Apache camp destroyed, another victory in what her father called bringing civilization to the wilderness. She never asked what happened to the people in those camps. Some questions were better left unspoken in the Hartford house. The fort buzzed with activity that morning. Soldiers hurried between buildings, their boots beating a steady rhythm on the hard-packed earth. Supply wagons creaked through the gates, loaded with ammunition and provisions. Elena watched from her window as her father gathered his officers, near the flagpole, their voices carrying on the wind like distant thunder. "We've received reports of Apache movement near Eagle Creek," Colonel Hartford was telling his men. His voice was steady, matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "They're getting bold again, raiding settlements, stealing cattle. Time to remind them who owns this territory." Lieutenant Morrison nodded eagerly. He was new to the fort, fresh from West Point with ideas about glory and promotion. "How many men should we take, sir?" "Enough to make sure none of them escape this time." The colonel's words were sharp as broken glass. "I want their camps found and destroyed. Every last one of them." Elena turned away from the window, her stomach twisting. She'd heard this conversation too many times before. The pattern never changed. Reports would come in, her father would plan his attack, and the soldiers would ride out with their guns and torches. They'd come back days later, dusty and tired, talking about another successful mission. But Elena had started noticing things. The way some soldiers wouldn't meet her eyes after these raids. The way supplies of children's clothes sometimes went missing from the fort's stores. The way her father burned certain reports without filing them. That evening, the fort held one of its monthly social gatherings. The officers' wives had decorated the mess hall with paper lanterns and wildflowers. A soldier played fiddle in the corner while couples danced across the wooden floor. Elena wore her best dress, green silk that brought out her eyes, and tried to smile when people complimented her appearance. "You look lovely tonight, Miss Hartford," said Lieutenant Morrison, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. He was handsome in his uniform with sandy hair and confident eyes. Her father approved of him, which meant marriage wasn't far behind if Morrison had his way. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Elena accepted the punch but kept her distance. Something about Morrison made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly. "Your father tells me you're quite the reader," Morrison continued, moving closer. "Perhaps we could discuss literature sometime. I have some interesting books in my quarters." The way he said quarters made Elena's skin crawl. She'd heard the other officers talk about Morrison when they thought no one was listening. He had a reputation with young women that wasn't entirely respectable. "I prefer to do my reading in the library," she said politely but firmly. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, though sometimes a man needs private conversation with a lady to truly get to know each other." His hand reached out to touch her arm. Elena stepped back quickly. "Don't touch me like that." Her voice carried across the room, louder than she'd intended. Several conversations stopped. People turned to stare. Morrison's face reddened. "I was simply being friendly, Miss Hartford. No need to make a scene." But Elena's temper, inherited from her father, was fully awake now. "I said don't touch me. That means keep your hands to yourself." The fiddle music stumbled to a stop. Colonel Hartford appeared beside them, his face like a storm cloud. "Is there a problem here?" "No, sir," Morrison said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." Elena wanted to speak up, to tell her father exactly what kind of man he was promoting. But the look in the colonel's eyes stopped her. This was his officer, his choice, his decision. And she was just his daughter. "Elena, perhaps you should retire for the evening," her father said quietly. It wasn't a suggestion. She nodded and left the hall, feeling dozens of eyes following her. Behind her the conversations resumed, but she knew what they'd be talking about for days. The colonel's daughter making a fuss. The colonel's daughter embarrassing a fine young officer. The colonel's daughter who didn't know her place. Later that night, Elena sat in her room brushing her hair and thinking about what had happened. Through her thin walls, she could hear her father and Morrison talking on the porch. "She's high-spirited," Morrison was saying, "but I can handle spirited women. Sometimes they just need a firm hand to guide them." "Elena needs structure," her father replied. "She's been without a mother's influence too long. A good husband would settle her down." "I'm prepared to take on that responsibility, sir. With your blessing, of course." Elena's brush stopped moving. They were discussing her like she was a horse being traded. Her future, her life, decided by two men who saw her as a problem to be solved, rather than a person with her own thoughts and feelings. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A scout had returned during the night with reports of Apache movements near the Mexican border. But this wasn't the usual raiding party. This was different. The scout spoke of a peace delegation, Apache leaders carrying white flags and wanting to meet with Army representatives. Elena found her father in his office, studying maps with his senior officers. Major Williams, an older man with gray whiskers, was shaking his head. "It could be a trap, Colonel. The Apache are known for their tricks. Or it could be genuine," said Captain Torres, the only Mexican-American officer on the post. "My sources in the Apache camp say they're tired of fighting. The women and children are starving. Maybe they really do want peace." Colonel Hartford stared at the map for a long moment. Red pins marked every Apache camp they'd destroyed over the past 2 years. There were dozens of them. Elena noticed her father's hands were shaking slightly. "Peace." He said the word like it tasted bitter. "After everything they've done? After all the settlers they've killed?" "Sir," Torres said carefully. "What about all the Apache we've killed? Maybe it's time to try talking instead of fighting." The colonel's eyes snapped up, cold and hard. "Captain Torres, you forget yourself. The Apache are savages. You don't negotiate with savages, you defeat them." But Elena saw something in her father's face that surprised her. For just a moment he looked tired, old, like a man carrying a weight that was finally becoming too heavy. Then the moment passed and his expression hardened again. "We'll meet with them," he decided, "but we go armed and ready. If this is a trick, they'll regret it." Elena spent the rest of the day thinking about peace. What would it mean? Would the fighting finally stop? Would her father come home without blood on his hands? For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. But hope was dangerous in a place like Fort Apache. Hope could get you hurt. Elena had learned that lesson young, watching her father change from the gentle man who'd tucked her into bed with stories into the hard soldier who saw enemies in every shadow. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Something that would change all their lives forever. That evening, she stood on the porch where her father had stood that morning, watching the desert stretch endlessly toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, Apache families were gathering, around fires telling their own stories, raising their own children. Elena wondered what those stories were like. Did Apache fathers tuck their daughters into bed? Did Apache mothers worry about their sons becoming soldiers? She'd never thought about such things before. Apache had always been just a word to her like enemy or threat, but now with peace talks coming, she found herself wondering about the people behind the word. Were they really the monsters her father described? Or were they just people trying to protect their homes and families, the same way her father was, trying to protect his? The questions troubled her sleep that night. She dreamed of red pins on maps, of children's clothes disappearing from supply rooms, of her father's hands shaking as he stared at all the destruction he'd caused. When she woke before dawn, Elena realized something had changed inside her. She could no longer accept simple answers to complicated questions. And somewhere in the desert, Apache scouts were probably watching the fort, preparing for a meeting that, 3 days later, the peace talks went wrong in the worst possible way. Elena watched from the fort's walls as her father's column returned, but instead of the hopeful procession she'd imagined, the soldiers came back angry and defeated. Dust. Clouds rose behind their horses like storm warnings, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in their postures. Behind the main group, a smaller party followed with a prisoner. Elena's heart sank as she realized what had happened. The peace talks hadn't brought understanding. They'd brought another captive for her father's jail. Colonel Hartford dismounted near the gates, his face darker than the desert storm clouds gathering overhead. Major Williams hurried to meet him, questions written across his weathered features. "What happened out there?" Williams asked, though his voice carried the weight of a man who already suspected the answer. "Ambush," the colonel said through gritted teeth. "Soon as we reached the meeting place, they attacked from 3 sides. Lost 2 good men before we could fight our way clear. But Captain Torres, who'd also been on the expedition, looked troubled." Elena watched him from her position on the wall, noting how his eyes avoided the colonel's. Something about his expression didn't match her father's story. "Bring the prisoner to the stockade," Hartford ordered. "Maybe he'll tell us where the rest of his war party is hiding." Elena climbed down from the wall and made her way toward the center of the fort. Curiosity pulled at her, stronger than the voice in her head that warned her to stay away. She'd never seen an Apache up close before. Despite living on the frontier for most of her life, they'd always been distant figures, threats on the horizon, stories told around dinner tables. The stockade was a small building behind the main barracks, with thick wooden walls and iron bars on the windows. Elena positioned herself where she could watch as the soldiers brought their prisoner inside. The man walked upright despite his bonds, his dark hair hanging loose around his shoulders. He wore traditional Apache clothing, deer hide decorated with beadwork, and moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in the wilderness. What surprised Elena most was his face. She'd expected something fierce, savage, inhuman. Instead, she saw intelligence in his dark eyes, dignity in the way he held his head high despite his circumstances. When he glanced in her direction, their eyes met for just a moment, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't a monster. This was a man. Elena. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "What are you doing here?" She turned to face him, trying to keep her expression neutral. "I was curious about the prisoner, Father. I've never seen an Apache before." Colonel Hartford's jaw tightened. "And now you have. They're dangerous, Elena. Don't let appearances fool you. This one probably killed settlers before we captured him." "Did he?" Elena asked. "Do we know what he's done?" The colonel stared at her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. "He's Apache. That's enough." But Elena caught the slight hesitation in her father's voice, the way his eyes shifted away from hers. She was beginning to recognize the signs when her father wasn't telling the complete truth. That evening, Doc Martinez approached Elena as she helped serve dinner in the officers' mess. The fort's physician was a kind man in his 50s, someone who'd seen enough, suffering to develop strong opinions about unnecessary violence. "Miss Elena," he said quietly, "I need to tend to the prisoner's injuries. Would you mind helping me carry some medical supplies?" Elena's pulse quickened. "What kind of injuries?" "Nothing too serious, but he took a bullet graze during the fighting. And he hasn't eaten since we brought him in." Doc Martinez lowered his voice even further. "Between you and me, I'm not sure this man was part of any ambush." They gathered bandages, antiseptic, and some bread and water. Elena's hands trembled slightly as they walked toward the stockade. She told herself it was just nervousness about seeing the prisoner again, but deep down she knew it was something else, something that felt like anticipation. The guard unlocked the door and stepped aside. Inside, the Apache man sat on a simple wooden bench, his wrists still bound but his back straight. In the lamplight, Elena could see he was younger than she'd first thought, probably not much older than herself. Doc Martinez knelt beside him and began examining the bullet wound on his arm. "This needs cleaning," he said gently, speaking in careful English. "I'm going to help you. No tricks." The prisoner nodded once, his dark eyes moving from the doctor to Elena. "You speak my language well, medicine man." Elena blinked in surprise. His English was not only understandable but quite good, with only a slight accent coloring his words. "You speak English," she said without thinking. "I learned from missionaries when I was young," he replied calmly, "before they decided we were beyond salvation." Doc Martinez worked on cleaning the wound while Elena held the lamp steady. The prisoner didn't flinch or make any sound of pain, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "What's your name?" Elena found herself asking. "Elena," Doc Martinez warned softly, but the prisoner answered anyway. "I am called Ayana by my people. It means eternal blossom in your language." "That's a beautiful name," Elena said, then felt foolish for the comment. Ayana looked at her with those intelligent eyes. "And you are the colonel's daughter? I have heard the soldiers speak of you." "What do they say?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop herself. "That you are, kinda that you read many books. That your father wants to find you a husband among his officers." There was no judgment in his voice, just simple observation. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "And what do you think about that?" "I think," Ayana said slowly, "that a woman should choose her own path. In Apache culture, women have strong voices in such matters." Doc Martinez finished bandaging the wound and sat back on his heels. "There. That should heal cleanly if you keep it dry." He offered Ayana the bread and water, which the prisoner accepted gratefully. As he ate, Elena found herself studying his face, noting the sharp cheekbones, the thoughtful eyes, the way he moved with careful economy of motion. "Were you really part of an ambush?" she heard herself ask. Ayana stopped eating and looked directly at her. "No. I came to the peace talks because my grandmother asked me to. She is a respected elder in our band. She believed words might succeed where weapons have failed." "Then why does my father say—" "Your father sees what he needs to see," Ayana interrupted gently. "I am not angry with him. He has lost men in this war. Pain can make people blind to truth." Elena glanced at Doc Martinez, who was packing up his supplies with careful attention to his work. She could tell he was listening to every word. "What really happened at the peace talks?" she asked. Ayana was quiet for a moment, considering. "Your soldiers came ready for war, not peace. When my people saw all the weapons, all the anger in their faces, some of the young warriors became afraid. They thought it was a trap. Fighting started before anyone could stop it. This was different from her father's version of events." Elena felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she got when her father's stories didn't quite match what she observed. "My grandmother always said peace is harder than war," Ayana continued. "War only requires hatred. Peace requires trust, and trust—" He met Elena's eyes again. "Trust requires seeing your enemy as human." Doc Martinez stood up, clearing his throat softly. "We should go, Miss Elena. The guard will be expecting us." As they prepared to leave, Elena found herself reluctant to walk away. Something about talking to Ayana felt important, like discovering a book she'd been searching for her entire life. "Will you be all right?" she asked. Ayana nodded. "I have survived worse than this, and I have hope." "Hope for what?" "That someday people like you and people like me can talk without walls between us, without fear." He smiled slightly, and Elena was struck by how the expression transformed his face. "Your grandmother's words about choosing your own path, they give me hope too." Outside the stockade, Doc Martinez walked beside Elena in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. That man's no warrior, Elena. He's educated, thoughtful, probably served as some kind of translator or negotiator for his people. Then why is my father treating him like a dangerous criminal? The doctor sighed deeply. Because admitting he made a mistake would mean admitting this whole war might have been different choices. Your father's a good man, but he's carrying a lot of guilt. Sometimes it's easier to keep fighting than to face what all the fighting has cost. That night, Elena lay in bed thinking about Ayana's words. She'd grown up believing Apache people were savage, uncivilized, incapable of complex thought or genuine feeling. But the man she'd met tonight was none of those things. He was intelligent, gentle, thoughtful. He spoke about his grandmother with love, about peace with hope, about her right to choose with respect. If her father was wrong about Ayana, what else might he be wrong about? How many other Apache people were like him? Just humans trying to protect their families and their way of life? Elena had never questioned her father's version of events before, but now doubts crept in like desert wind through the cracks in the fort's walls. Over the next few days, Elena found reasons to visit the stockade. Elena's world shattered on a Tuesday morning when she overheard her father talking to Lieutenant Morrison in the colonel's office. She'd been walking past with fresh flowers for the dining table when Morrison's voice stopped her cold. "When do you want to carry out the execution, sir?" Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the wall outside the door, hardly daring to breathe. "Day after tomorrow should give us enough time to prepare," her father replied. "Make it public. I want every soldier on this post to see what happens to Apache warriors who attack peace delegations." "What about the prisoner exchange the Apache requested? They're offering 3 white captives for him." Colonel Hartford's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Let them keep their captives. This one dies as an example. Maybe then his people will understand we mean business." Elena's blood turned to ice, water. They were going to kill Ayana. Not in battle, not in self-defense, but in cold blood as a message to his people. Everything he'd told her about the peace talks being a misunderstanding. Everything she'd come to believe about his innocence. None of it mattered to her father. She stumbled away from the door, her mind racing faster than her feet. 2 days. She had 2 days to figure out how to save an innocent man's life. But how could she? A 19-year-old woman with no authority, no weapons, no allies stand against the entire United States Army. That afternoon, Elena made her way to the stockade with shaking hands and a heart full of desperate courage. The guard, Sergeant Murphy, had grown accustomed to her visits and barely looked up from his card game as she entered. Ayana was sitting in a patch of sunlight from the barred window, reading one of the books she'd brought him. He looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately grew concerned. "Something troubles you deeply," he observed. "Your spirit is wounded." Elena sank onto the wooden stool Doc Martinez had left there, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "They're going to kill you," she whispered. "Day after tomorrow. My father refuses the prisoner exchange. He wants to make an example of you." Ayana closed the book carefully and set it aside. For a long moment he was silent, absorbing this news with the same calm dignity he'd shown since his capture. "I see," he said finally. "This does not surprise me. Your father carries much pain from this war. Sometimes pain demands blood to quiet. Don't you're not angry?" Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You're going to die for something you didn't do, and you're not even angry?" "Anger is a fire that burns the one who carries it," Ayana replied gently. "I am sad for your father. That he thinks more killing will heal his wounds. I am sad for you that you must carry this knowledge. But anger would not help anyone now." Elena wanted to scream at his acceptance, to shake him until he felt the rage and injustice that were tearing her apart inside. Instead, she found herself crying, tears streaming down her cheeks as all her helplessness poured out. Ayana moved closer to the bars that separated them. "Elena," he said softly, "look at me." She raised her tear-stained face to meet his eyes. "You have shown me kindness when you owed me nothing," he continued. "You have listened when others would not hear. You have seen my humanity when others see only enemy. These are not small gifts. They matter more than you know. But they don't save your life, Elena choked out. No, Ayana agreed. But they have saved something more important. They have shown me that understanding is possible between our peoples. That hope is not foolish. You have given me peace in my heart. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. But inside, a new determination was growing, born from desperation and watered with tears. What if there was a way? She asked quietly. What if someone could get you out of here? Ayana studied her face carefully. That someone would be risking everything, their life, their family, their future. No man's life is worth such a sacrifice. Let me decide what your life is worth, Elena said fiercely. For the first time since she'd known him, Ayana looked truly moved. His dark eyes widened slightly and she saw him swallow hard. Elena, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You would do this thing? For me? I would do this thing for justice, she replied, though her heart whispered other reasons she wasn't ready to acknowledge. I would do it because killing an innocent man is wrong, no matter what uniform the killer wears. They spent the next hour planning in hushed voices. The fort's routines were predictable, the guard schedules regular. Elena knew which buildings held supplies, which gates were watched least carefully, which horses were fastest. Ayana knew the desert, the water sources, the hidden trails that could take them beyond her father's reach. My people have a winter. Camp in the mountains, he told her. 3 days' ride north by west. But Elena, if you help me escape, you can never come back here. Your father will hunt us both. Elena had been thinking the same thing. Helping Ayana would mean abandoning everything she'd ever known, her home, her identity as the colonel's daughter, her entire future as she'd imagined it. The weight of that choice pressed down on her like a physical thing. I know, she whispered. And still you would do this? Elena met his eyes through the iron bars. In them, she saw her reflection. Not the obedient army daughter she'd always been, but someone stronger, someone willing to risk everything for what she believed was right. Yes, she said simply. I would. That night, Elena lay sleepless in her bed, going over the plan again and again. Tomorrow evening, during the dinner hour when most of the soldiers would be in the mess hall, she would create a distraction near the main gates. A small fire in the hay storage barn. Nothing dangerous, but smoky enough to draw attention. While the guards dealt with that, she would slip Ayana a knife hidden in his evening meal, along with the key to his cell that she'd stolen from Sergeant Murphy's quarters. Once free, Ayana would make his way to the horse corrals behind the fort. Elena would meet him there with supplies and 2 of the fastest horses. They would ride hard for the mountains, staying off the main trails, following paths Ayana knew from his youth. It was a desperate plan, full of holes and dependent on luck. But it was the only chance they had. The next day crawled by like a wounded animal. Elena went through the motions of normal life, helping with household duties, making polite conversation with the officers' wives, avoiding Lieutenant Morrison's increasingly insistent attempts to court her. But inside, her nerves sang with tension. As evening approached, she gathered the supplies they'd need: blankets, dried food, water bottles, ammunition for the rifle she planned to take from her father's gun cabinet. Each item felt heavy with the weight of her decision. Once she took these things, there would be no going back. At dinner time, Elena excused herself from the officers' mess, claiming a headache. Instead, she made her way to the hay barn near the main gates. Her hands shook as she struck the match and touched it to a pile of old straw she'd prepared earlier. The flames caught quickly, sending up clouds of thick, choking smoke. Fire! She screamed, running toward the mess hall. Fire at the main gates! The response was immediate and chaotic. Soldiers poured out of buildings, grabbing buckets and shovels. Officers shouted orders while enlisted men formed bucket brigades. In the confusion, no one noticed Elena slip away toward the stockade. Sergeant Murphy had abandoned his post to help fight the fire. Elena's stolen key turned easily in the lock, and she found Ayana waiting, the hidden knife already cutting through his bonds. Are you ready? She asked, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart. He nodded, then surprised her by reaching. through the bars to touch her face gently. Whatever happens now, know that you have shown me what courage looks like. They slipped out of the stockade and made their way through shadows toward the horse corrals. Behind them, the fire was already under control, but the confusion would last a few more precious minutes. Elena's heart hammered as they reached the horses. 2 strong animals she'd selected earlier already saddled and ready. "Can you ride?" she asked Ayanna as they mounted. "Better than most white men," he replied with the first smile she'd seen from him since his capture. They rode hard into the desert night, the fort's lights growing smaller behind them. Elena had never been beyond the fort's walls after dark, and the vast emptiness of the desert was both terrifying and exhilarating. Above them, stars blazed in patterns Ayanna could read like maps. For the first hour they said nothing, concentrating on putting distance between themselves and the inevitable pursuit. But as they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek, the reality of what Elena had done began to sink in. She was no longer Elena Hartford, the colonel's daughter. She was a fugitive, a traitor in the eyes of everyone she'd ever known. Her old life was gone as surely as if it had burned up in that hay barn. "Do you regret it?" Ayanna asked quietly, watching her face in the moonlight. Elena considered the question seriously. Behind them lay everything familiar: safety, respectability, the approval of her father and her community. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the unknown world of the Apache people who might or might not accept her. "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to do what was right." Ayanna's smile in the darkness was like sunrise after a long night. The Apache camp nestled in a hidden valley like a secret kept by the mountains themselves. Elena's first glimpse of it came as the morning sun painted the peaks gold and red. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed off canyon. Walls and the sound of everyday life filled the air, so different from the military precision she'd known all her life. But their arrival brought an immediate hush. Apache people emerged from their homes, their faces showing everything from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. Elena stayed close to Ayanna as he dismounted and began speaking in rapid Apache to the gathered crowd. An elderly woman pushed through the group, moving with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Her gray hair was braided with silver ornaments, and her dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen many seasons pass. When she looked at Elena, those eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Grandmother," Ayanna said in English, clearly for Elena's benefit. "This is Elena. She saved my life and risked everything to bring me home." The woman Elena would come to know as Mountain Dove studied her for a long moment. Then she spoke in accented but clear English. "White girl who helps Apache against her own people. This is unusual thing. Why do you do this?" Elena felt dozens of eyes watching her, waiting for her answer. Her throat was dry from the desert ride, her legs shaky from exhaustion, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Because killing innocent people is wrong," she said simply. "No matter who does the killing." Mountain Dove translated this for the crowd, and Elena heard murmurs of discussion in Apache. Some voices sounded approving, others doubtful. One young warrior stepped forward, his face hard with anger. "She is daughter of the soldier chief who destroys our camps," he said in English, "who burns our food stores and kills our elders. How do we know this is not trick?" "Because, Red Hawk," Ayanna replied calmly. "She could have let me die and earned her father's praise. Instead, she chose to save me and lose everything she has ever known." Red Hawk spat on the ground. "Words are easy. How do we know her heart speaks true?" Before anyone could answer, the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the mountains. The Apache people froze, listening. Elena's blood chilled as she recognized the sound. Military weapons, probably her father's search party. They followed. "Us," she whispered, guilt crashing over her like a cold wave. Mountain Dove's expression sharpened. She barked orders in Apache, and immediately the camp exploded into organized activity. Children were gathered, horses prepared, weapons distributed. Elena realized She was watching people who had learned to pack their entire lives and run at a moment's notice. "How many soldiers does your father have?" Ayanna asked Elena urgently. 60, maybe 70 men, she replied, her mind racing. "But he'll have sent scouts ahead. They know where we are." Red Hawk grabbed Elena's arm roughly. "You see? She brings death to our people just like her father." "Let her go," Ayanna said, sharply, but Elena saw the doubt in even his eyes now. Mountain Dove raised her hand for silence. "We talk of blame later. Now we survive. Red Hawk, take the families up the hidden trail. Warriors, stay to slow the soldiers." "Grandmother, no," Ayanna protested. "There are too many of them. We should all run." The old woman's eyes flashed. "Run where? This is our home. These are our mountains. If we keep running, we run until there is nowhere left to run to." Elena felt sick with responsibility. These people were going to fight because of her choice, because she'd led her father straight to them. Children might die because she'd tried to save one man. "There's another way," she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "My father doesn't want to fight all of you. He wants me back, and he wants Ayanna dead. What if I went back with him?" "No," Ayanna said immediately. "He will kill you for helping me escape." "Maybe. Or maybe he'll be so relieved to have me back that he'll listen to reason." Elena knew she was grasping at desperate hope, but it was better than watching innocent people die. I could tell him the truth about the peace talks, about how this war started. "Maybe. Your father does not want truth," Mountain Dove said gently. "Truth is too painful for him now. He wants only victory." The gunfire was getting closer. Elena could hear her father's voice carrying across the rocks, shouting orders. He sounded furious and desperate, a dangerous combination. "Elena Hartford." His voice boomed through the canyon. "I know you're in there. Come out now and no one has to get hurt." Mountain Dove snorted. "He speaks lies like breathing. Already his soldiers are moving to surround us." Elena's mind raced. There had to be a way to prevent bloodshed, some solution that didn't end with people dying because of her choices. Then an idea struck her. Dangerous and probably foolish, but the only chance she could see. "What if we could make him see the truth?" she asked. "Not tell him, but show him. Make him understand what his war has really cost." "How?" Ayanna asked. Elena took a deep breath. "The supply depot raid 3 months ago. My father reported that Apache warriors attacked and killed 5 soldiers. But I overheard Captain Torres telling Doc Martinez what really happened. They found Apache children hiding in the depot, taking food because their families were starving. The soldiers panicked and started shooting. Those weren't warriors they killed. They were kids trying to find something to eat." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Even Red Hawk looked shaken by this revelation. "You have proof of this?" Mountain Dove asked quietly. "Torres wrote a report. My father buried it, but I know where he keeps his private papers." Elena's voice grew stronger as the plan formed in her mind. "There are other reports too, evidence of what really happened in all these raids. If we could get that evidence to someone with authority over my father." The territorial governor, Ayanna, said suddenly. "He's been asking questions about the Apache campaigns. If he saw proof of what really happened." Another volley of gunshots closer now. Mountain Dove made a decision. "Red Hawk, take half the warriors and begin moving our families through the back canyon. Make noise. Let the soldiers think we are all fleeing that direction. Ayanna, gather 5 of our best riders. We try this plan of the white girl. And if it fails," Red Hawk demanded. Mountain Dove's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Then we fight. But first, we try wisdom." The next hour was the longest of Elena's life. While Apache families slipped away through hidden mountain paths, she found herself part of a desperate plan that could either end the fighting or get them all killed. Ayanna and his companions would create a diversion, drawing the soldiers away from the main camp. Meanwhile, Elena would slip back to Fort Apache with Mountain Dove and 2 other Apache women, all disguised as Mexican traders. "This is madness," Ayanna said as they prepared to part ways. "Your father's men will shoot you on sight." Not if they think I'm a captive who escaped, Elena replied. She'd torn her dress and rubbed dirt on her face to look like she'd been through an ordeal. I'll tell them I got away during the fighting, that I need to get back to warn about Apache reinforcements. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. As Elena prepared to leave the only people who'd shown her true acceptance, she realized how much her life had changed in just a few days. These Apache people had welcomed her when her own people would probably call her a traitor. They'd listened to her ideas and trusted her with their children's safety. If this works, she said to Mountain Dove, what happens to me? I can't stay at the fort after this, but I don't know if I can survive in your world either. The old woman studied her face. Child, you think too much about worlds and too little about hearts. Heart that chooses justice over comfort, that chooses truth over safety. This heart can survive anywhere. The journey back to Fort Apache took all day, with Elena and her disguised companions moving carefully through terrain crawling with soldiers. Elena's story worked better than she'd dared hope. The guards were so relieved to see the colonel's daughter alive that they didn't question her tale of escape and evasion. But Colonel Hartford was another matter entirely. When Elena entered his office that evening, she found a man aged years in the past few days. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking with exhaustion and stress. Elena. His voice broke as he stood to embrace her. Thank God you're alive. When I found you gone, when I realized what you'd done. He pulled back to look at her face. Are you hurt? Did that savage hurt you? His name is Ayanna, Father. And no, he didn't hurt me. He protected me. Colonel. Hartford's expression hardened. They turned you against your own people, made you betray everything you were raised to believe. No, Elena said firmly. They helped me see the truth. The same truth you've been trying to hide from yourself. She pulled the documents from her coat, papers Mountain Dove had somehow acquired from the colonel's own files during their infiltration of the fort. Reports that told the real story of the Apache Wars, written by officers who'd witnessed the truth but been ordered to keep quiet. Read these, Father. Please, just read them and tell me who the real savages are. Colonel Hartford stared at the papers in Elena's hands as if they were poisonous snakes. I don't need to read lies and Apache propaganda. These aren't Apache documents. They're written by your own officers. 6 months later, Elena stood at the edge of the same hidden valley where she'd first encountered Ayanna's people. But everything had changed. The Apache camp was no longer a place of fear and hiding. Children played openly in the meadow while their mothers worked on traditional crafts they hadn't had time to practice during the war years. Elders sat in circles, sharing stories that had nearly been lost forever. Elena herself was transformed as well. Her pale skin was bronzed by desert sun, her hands calloused from learning Apache ways of working leather and weaving baskets. She wore traditional Apache clothing now, decorated with beadwork that Mountain Dove had taught her to make during the long winter months. Most remarkably, she moved with a confidence that had never existed during her years as the colonel's daughter. The Apache people had given her a name, Brave Heart Woman, earned through her actions during the difficult months of transition. When territorial investigators had arrived to examine the evidence Elena had gathered, she'd served as translator between two worlds that barely understood each other. When Apache families needed advocates in the government negotiations, Elena had used her education and her father's former connections to fight for fair treatment. When supplies ran short during the harsh mountain winter, she'd organized relief efforts that saved lives on both sides. You have become one of us in all the ways that matter, Mountain Dove told her, as they worked together preparing for the day's ceremony. Today marked the official signing of the new peace treaty, one based on truth rather than fear. Sometimes I feel like I'm still caught between two worlds, Elena admitted, adjusting the silver ornaments in her hair, neither fully Apache nor fully white. Mountain Dove smiled, her weathered hands gentle as she helped Elena with her ceremonial dress. Child, you think the worlds are separate, but you have shown us they can be joined. You are the bridge between them. Across the valley, Elena could see the delegation from the territorial capital setting up their tents. Governor Martinez himself had come to sign the treaty, along with a small group of soldiers and officials. Among them, Elena knew, was her father. Colonel William Hartford had aged dramatically during his court-martial and subsequent imprisonment. The investigation Elena had triggered had revealed years of falsified reports, unauthorized attacks on non-combatant camps, and deliberate sabotage of previous peace efforts. He'd served 4 months in military prison before being stripped of rank and dishonorably discharged. Now he was here as a private citizen, broken and gray-haired at 54, asking for a chance to make things right. Elena wasn't sure how she felt about seeing him again. "Are you nervous about your father coming?" Ayana asked, approaching with the easy stride she'd come to love during their months together. Elena turned to look at the man who'd become her husband in an Apache ceremony. 3 months earlier, their relationship had grown slowly through shared hardship and mutual respect. What had begun as gratitude had deepened into genuine partnership, built on common values and complementary strengths. "Nervous, yes, but also hopeful," Elena replied, honestly. "The letters he's been writing show a man trying to find his way back to decency. Maybe today we can finally heal the wounds between us." The ceremony began at midday, with representatives from both cultures participating in rituals of peace and reconciliation. Apache elders burned sage and offered prayers to the 4 directions, while territorial officials read from carefully drafted legal documents that guaranteed Apache rights to their traditional homeland. But the most meaningful moment came when Mountain Dove stepped forward with a special presentation. In her arms, she carried a beautifully woven blanket, its patterns telling the story of the past year's journey from war to peace. "This blanket was made by many hands," the elderly woman said, speaking in English so all could understand. "Apache women and white women working together. Each thread is a memory of pain transformed into hope. Each color is a promise that our children will know each other as family, not enemies." She walked across the ceremonial space to where Colonel Hartford stood with the other observers. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she watched her father's reaction. The man who'd once commanded soldiers to destroy Apache camps now stood quietly as an Apache elder approached him. When Mountain Dove held out the blanket, his hands shook as he accepted it. "I don't deserve this," he said, his voice barely audible. "None of us deserve peace," Mountain Dove replied gently. "But all of us need it. Your daughter has shown us that healing is possible when people choose courage over hatred." Elena watched her father hold the blanket, saw tears streaming down his weathered face as he understood the full weight of what was being offered to him. Forgiveness from people he'd wronged beyond measure. A chance to be something other than the destroyer he'd become. Later, as the official ceremonies concluded and people began to mingle more freely, Elena found herself walking with her father away from the crowds. They climbed to a ridge overlooking the valley, where they could speak privately for the first time since that night at the fort. "You look happy," Colonel Hartford said quietly, studying his daughter's transformed appearance. "Different, but happy." "I am happy, Father. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I belong." He nodded slowly. "I can see that. The way you move, the way people respond to you. You've found your purpose." They stood in silence for a while, watching Apache and white children playing together in the meadow below. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just a year earlier. "I've been thinking about your mother," her father said eventually, "about what she would say if she could see all this." Elena waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever thoughts were working through his mind. She always said hatred was a poison that hurt the one carrying it more than anyone else. I used to think she was naive, too soft for frontier life. But she was right, wasn't she? All these years of carrying hatred for the Apache, it turned me into something she would have been ashamed of. Mother would have understood your grief, Father. She would have forgiven the mistakes you made in pain. Colonel Hartford shook his head. Maybe she would have, but I'm not sure I can forgive myself. Do you know how many families I destroyed? How many children I left orphaned? I keep thinking about Apache mothers watching their children die, feeling the same grief I felt when I lost her. And I caused that grief, Elena. I spread it like a disease. Elena reached out and took her father's hand. It felt thin and fragile, nothing like the strong hand she remembered from childhood. Grief doesn't have to be a disease, Father. It can be medicine if you use it to heal instead of hurt. You can't undo what happened, but you can choose what happens next. They were interrupted by Ayanna climbing the ridge to join them. Elena felt a moment of tension as the two men faced each other, her husband and her father, representing two sides of a conflict that had claimed so many lives. "Colonel Hartford," Ayanna said formally, then caught himself. "Mr. Hartford, I wanted to thank you for coming today." Elena's father looked surprised. "Thank me? After everything I've done to your people?" "Coming here took courage," Ayanna replied. "Simply. It would have been easier to stay away, to keep carrying anger and shame. But healing requires both sides to choose differently." Colonel Hartford studied Ayanna's face. "You're the one who was in my prison, the one Elena helped escape." "Yes, and you are the man who would have killed me for crimes I didn't commit. But today we stand together as family, because your daughter taught us both that people can change." Elena watched her father absorb this. She could see him struggling with the reality that the savage he'd hated was showing him more grace than he'd shown anyone in years. "I don't understand how you can forgive, her father said finally. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting," Ayanna explained. "It's about choosing to build something better from the ruins of something broken. My grandmother taught me that carrying hatred is like carrying burning coals. You're the one who gets burned." As the sun began to set over the valley, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a frightened young woman trapped by other people's expectations, watching her father wage a war built on lies and grief. Now she was a bridge between worlds, married to a man who'd taught her that love could exist without possession, part of a community that valued wisdom over wealth. The changes hadn't been easy. There had been months of struggle as Apache and white communities learned to trust each other. Some people on both sides refused to participate in the peace process, choosing to nurse old grievances rather than build new relationships. Elena herself had faced criticism from white settlers who saw her as a traitor, and suspicion from some Apache who questioned her motives. But slowly, steadily, understanding had grown. Trade relationships developed between Apache craftspeople and white merchants. Apache guides helped white settlers navigate the desert safely, while white teachers worked with Apache elders to preserve traditional stories in written form. Children, who'd grown up fearing each other, began to play together and learn each other's languages. "What happens now?" her father asked as they prepared to return to the